Hello, Venerable Lekden.
Tashi delek. Hello.
Hello, Venerable. Do you want me to, do you want Alice will be leading or moderating today? Do you want us to share the text online? I mean, we've shared the book with everybody, but the pages, do you want us to share online?
Um, I don't think so. It's a lot
Okay.
of text to share online, and there'll be
Yeah.
nothing but text on the screen all the time.
Yeah.
So let's not share it online, but let's
Okay.
go ahead and once we start, so once people have joined, we can again share it in the chat so people can download it, and
Yeah.
we'll discuss it with folk that way.
We've shared it with already about 14, 15 people.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
yeah,
Okay,
we
Venerable.
can, we
Thank
can do
you.
it like that.
I'm just going to be playing Mitsema now.
Okay.
Thank you, Venerable.
starting in some minutes. Why don't you take a moment to start priming your mind for the session, settling down, being a bit focused and mindful. And as you know, we encourage everyone to follow the practice of awaiting the teacher standing with your hands folded. And after the teacher joins, offering 3 prostrations to the teacher as the representative who is going to pass the teachings of the Buddha to us. So we will still wait for a few minutes for more people to join. But again, you can use this time meaningfully. Thank you for being here. Hi again, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We will be starting in a few minutes. And again, just a gentle encouragement to use the time meaningfully and prime your mind for the session. And one of the ways you can do that is by awaiting the teacher's arrival standing with your hands folded. And after the teacher's arrival, in this case, after he joins us in the call, offering 3 prostrations. There's some note on it in the chat as well. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Tashi Dele. Good evening.
Hello, everyone.
Good evening, everyone. For those of you who are ready, can you join us in prostrations, offering prostrations? If you are not able to do so physically, you can, of course, offer them mentally. Thank you.
Okay, friends. Thank you so much for joining us.
Venerable,
Yeah, go
can
ahead.
I just take a minute?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you all for joining in. Today's a really auspicious day and an auspicious moment because this particular teaching is something that Kyabje Lama Zopa Rinpoche had advised a lot of us at Choe Khor Sum Ling and students of Choe Khor Sum Ling for many years to study. And we have finished one of doing this course once many years ago, and we have the opportunity to study and learn this incredible text again. And thank you, Venerable Lekden, for accepting to teach us this course. It's not an easy course, but it's something that I think we all need to learn. The benefits that are there for people like us, lay people and people with empty pots for heads, is really quite a lot. And thank you for teaching us this from the beginning, as if we are all not, beginners. And I hope we all can join together and learn and progress on the path to enlightenment, maybe slowly, some maybe at rapid speed, but I hope we are on the path and our teachers are there to guide us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Deepti. So thank you everyone for joining us at this first class in studying the Middle Length Lamrim. Let's begin today by setting aside whatever worldly activities we've been doing all day, whatever has been occupying our mind, our life, whatever running around we've been doing. Let's put that all aside and let ourselves be fully present together. Whatever space you're in, let's try to recognize that as a sacred space where you've come to study the Dharma, to learn how to make the Dharma an integral part of your life, to study this precious text. And so, in that way, we are very intentional with our time together. And with that, we want to set a strong motivation that the reason we are here together, the reason we're studying this text together, is not simply for our own benefit. It's not simply so we can gain intellect, right? But it's so that we might be able to be of service to others. And the way we do that is by transforming our mind, by improving our mind, by developing compassion and bodhicitta and wisdom, all the things necessary to become Buddhas. And so as we progress towards Buddhahood ourselves, we experience bliss, happiness, contentment, peace in our own lives. And that gives us the strength and the power and the understanding that will allow us to be of greater service to other sentient beings. And so with that in mind, we set the strong motivation that the reason I engage in this practice of study is not merely for my own benefit, but so that I might be of greatest possible benefit to other sentient beings. So very strongly make that motivation. Let that rest right in your mind, the forefront of your mind. And so we'll begin today by offering some prayers, and then we'll get into the text after our preliminary prayers. So we'll start with offering refuge and bodhicitta, which we will offer 3 times in Tibetan and then once in English. And then we'll continue with the other prayers in English as we go. So I encourage you to recite these along with me. We should all be reciting them. But of course, reciting them out loud isn't as important as feeling them in your mind, right? Like living them. So mere lip service to the prayers isn't useful, but trying to develop the mind that resonates with the meaning of these prayers, to try to let these prayers suffuse your body and your mind in a meaningful way, that's far more important than reciting them aloud. But reciting them aloud also does help us generate merit. We all need more merit, and it helps connect us to the teachings and to the lineage of the practice. So I encourage everyone to recite these prayers aloud with us together. Probably keep your mics muted because Zoom doesn't like it when everyone's reciting things at once. But please do recite these along with me, okay? Sangye churan soki chonam la chanchu paru dagni kyapsu chi dagi jinsogi pesonam gi jola pencher sangye dru par shok sangye churan soki chonam la chanchu paru dagni kyapsu chi dagi jinsogi pesonam gi jola pencher sangye dru par shok Sange churan soki chonam la chanchu paru dagni kyapsu chi dagi jinsogi pesonam gi drola pencher sange drupar shok. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. I reverently prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time, and I rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain unto the end of cyclic existence and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. And I will offer a short mandala offering. And so, especially at the beginning of a teaching, we should always offer, the students should offer a mandala to request the teaching. And then we also offer a mandala to request the blessings of all the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas. And so we'll recite this twice, once in Tibetan and then once in English. So you can picture that the first time that you recite it or you listen along in Tibetan, that is requesting the teaching, which is especially an auspicious thing to do here in the first session of this new text. And then the second time when we recite it in English, that is requesting all the blessings of all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And so a mandala offering is visualizing all of the universe, the entire universe, and we use the model of the Indian cosmology of Mount Meru to visualize the entire universe, and then we purify it in our mind so it has no stains, no faults, no jagged edges. And then we offer that purified land to all the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas so that they may use it to bring bliss to all sentient beings. So that's what we're visualizing as we offer this mandala. 사시프기 조익싱메토 트라미라블링시 니데겐 파디 상계싱드 믹테와이 조크나만닥싱라 제파쇼 This ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, the four continents, the sun, and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and I offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Hiram Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niryatayami. And so we'll continue with praise to Shakyamuni Buddha. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. When, O supreme amongst humans, you were born in this earth, you paced out 7 strides and then said, I am supreme in this world. To you who were wise then, I prostrate. With pure bodies, forms supremely pure, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best, Lord, to you I prostrate. With the supreme signs, face like spotless moon, color like gold, to you I prostrate. Dust free like you, the 3 worlds are not, incomparably wise one, to you I prostrate. The Savior having great compassion, the Founder having all understanding, the field of merit with qualities like a vast ocean, to you, the one gone to thusness, I prostrate. The purity that frees one from attachment, the virtue that frees one from the lower realms, the one path, the sublime pure reality, to the Dharma that pacifies, I prostrate. Those who are liberated and who also show the path to liberation, the holy field qualified with realizations, who are devoted to the moral precepts, to you, the sublime community intending virtue, I prostrate. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all 3 ever devout homage, to all worthy of respect, bowing with bodies as many as all realms atoms in all aspects, with supreme faith I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions. Perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a visual aberration, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see, condition things as such. Through these merits may sentient beings attain the rank of all-seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean where they are perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. And we will conclude with the Heart Sutra. I prostrate to the Arya triple gem. Thus did I hear one time. The Bhagawan was dwelling on massive Vulture's mountain in Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagawan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the bodhisattva, mahasattva, Arya, Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those 5 aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, through the power of the Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara. How should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Sharadvatiputra. Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those 5 aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty. Emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomena. There is no I element, and so on up to and including no mind element, and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on up to and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the endpoint of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the 3 times also manifestly completely awaken to the unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance upon the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as the truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared, Tadyata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhi Swaha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage, it is like that, it is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom, just as you have indicated, and even the Tathagatas will rejoice. The Bhagavan, having thus spoken, the Venerable Sharadvariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that which had been spoken by the Bhagavan. And we'll just conclude with a quick prayer to help overcome any obstacles that may face our teaching today. I prostrate to the gathering of dakinis and the three chakras who abide in the holy yoga of using space. By your powers of clairvoyance and magical emanation, look after practitioners like a mother her child. Akasamartha Shadara Samaraya Pe, Akasamartha Shadara Samaraya Pe, Akasamartha Shadara. Akasamarata Shadara Samaraya Pe Tayatha Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhi Swaha. By the teachings of the three supreme jewels possessing the power of truth, may inner and outer hindrances be transformed, may they be dispelled, may they be pacified. Shintam Kuriye Swaha. May all negative forces opposed to Dharma be completely pacified. May the host of 80,000 obstacles be pacified. May we be separated from problems and harmful conditions to the Dharma. May all enjoyments be in accordance with the Dharma. And may there be auspiciousness and perfect auspiciousness and perfect happiness here, right now. Great. Thank you for that. So welcome to this first class on the middle length Lamrim. I'm really excited to be able to teach this class, to offer this class at CKSL. As usual, our kind of question policy, I'll just mention it up at the top, is that you can interrupt me at any time to ask a question if it's pertinent to what we're talking about in the text or what I'm talking about at that moment. If it isn't quite pertinent, then maybe you can save it for the end. I'm going to try to leave time for Q&A at the end of every session or every class. And if your questions keep kind of piling up, maybe you can save them and contact me directly instead of taking over everyone's time if you have multiple questions, right? We try to be respectful of everyone else that is here together. But I won't see you probably if you raise your hand or anything like this. I don't have that kind of focus. So as a result, you can go ahead and
Venerable,
interrupt me. Yes.
Venerable, yeah, thanks for today's session. Just before you start, in the email it was mentioned it's hybrid. So you are in the center
So
in
right now,
Bangalore?
this week and next week is online only, and then it will
Okay.
be then the schedule will publish it that it'll be both hybrid and online only depending on the week. But this
Okay.
week
In
and next
today's
week will
email
be
it was
online only.
mentioned as hybrid. So I thought you're at
Yeah,
the center to take your blessings. Okay. I would attend
yeah,
online itself. Yeah. Thank you.
okay, yeah, yeah. So let's begin, since we are beginning this text, as we begin any teaching session, by trying to align ourselves with the proper attitude for a student, right? And there are a number of different discourses that discuss the proper attitude to have as a student whenever you're engaging in study. And the one we will try to adopt today is we will try to avoid the three faults of a faulty or broken vessel or water vessel. This actually is taught in this text, but we probably won't get to it today. So we'll start out with it. So whenever we approach a new text, whenever we study anything, and whether you're with a teacher or you're studying on your own, you want to avoid the three faults of being like a vessel that is either turned upside down or is stained or has a crack in it. And so a pot, to hold water, if it is upside down, then no matter how much water you pour onto it, it's always going to be empty. And in the same way, when you come to a teaching, when you come to a text, if you're not paying attention, if you're distracted, if you aren't receptive to whatever it is that you are trying to study, then you're not going to receive anything, right? So we don't want to be like a pot that is upside down. We want to be open and receptive and attentive. Next, if you're like a pot that is stained, right? So a pot that is stained, that hasn't been cleaned out thoroughly, then even if you pour in crystal clear water, that water is going to become polluted and not usable. So when we come to a teaching, we don't want to come to that teaching with preconceptions. We don't want to have baggage. Now, that's not to say don't be skeptical. Of course, we're encouraged to be skeptical, to really investigate the teaching, to make sure we understand it. But to come in saying, I already know what this teaching is about, I have a better idea than this teaching, or I've already received this teaching, I don't need to hear it again, I've already studied it once, I can skim this part. Any of these things are coming into a teaching where you're already deciding the end before you even go on the journey, right? So we don't want to have preconceptions, whether they be preconceptions that are antagonistic towards the topic, or whether they are preconceptions that say, I already know this, I can skim this part or not pay attention, right? We want to be entirely eager to hear whatever the teaching is and to study whatever the teaching is. So that is how we avoid being like a pot that has a stain. And finally, we want to avoid being like a pot that has a crack in it or a hole in it. No matter how much water you pour into that pot, it's always going to leak out. It'll never be filled. And in the same way, we need to be attentive, right? We don't want to be let our mind wander. We want to stay focused on the text and on the teaching and on the practice that's in front of us. So let's just take a moment to really try to embody those three qualities: the quality of being open-minded and present and eager, of putting all of our prejudices and our preconceptions aside, and of being attentive and not allowing ourselves to be mindless or distracted. Great. And so I thought I'd start by kind of talking about what our plan is, or my plan is for studying this text. So these are our Saturday night classes, right, which are designed for a more advanced audience, an advanced beginner audience, right? Anyone is welcome, but there is a little more expected from the part of the students. So I very much anticipate that you will all be reading the text along with me, and not just during the class, but also in between classes, right? So there's PDF available that I'm sure has been shared with you. And so as we continue in this series, I want you to be reading the text ahead of time, and depending on the topic, we're not going to be going remarkably fast. This is a long text. I've seen this text taught when this text was taught a couple years ago, or a couple years ago, more than a decade ago at Nalanda. It took them a year to study the whole text at Nalanda Monastery in France. So we're going to be studying this text for a long time. I don't know how long. We'll see. We might have to take breaks here and there, depending on our schedules and what's going on. Maybe we'll have guest teachers come in and do some things like this, but it's not going to be a quick deal, right? So we're in it together to study this whole text, and we're going to take our time with it. We're not trying to win a race, but that also means from your side, I really hope that you are studying on your own at home, that you're reading ahead, and that you can come to our classes together and you'll have questions, right? You'll review everything we studied the week before. And then if you have any doubts about that, you'll bring those up. And then you'll review the material that we're going to be studying the next week and see if you have any questions about that as well. And together, then we'll be able to go into this material and we'll get the most out of it, right? I don't think we're going to share the text on the screen just because it's a full page text and it would be very hard to read anyway. So we'll see. If it doesn't work today, then maybe we'll adjust next week. But we're going to play that by ear. But so that's our plan for studying this together, right? We're going to go through this text together. And I'm going to teach this text the way it is taught to me, which is I'm going to read through the whole text as we go. And this isn't a transmission. I'm not giving a transmission of this text, okay? So don't have that mindset. But I'm going to read through the whole text as we go. And then I'll stop at the different sections to go over any of the difficult points of those sections. Now, looking over the material we're going to talk about today, a lot of it's very straightforward. So maybe it won't need a lot of commentary. And the text goes back and forth. Some parts are going to be very easy to understand and not need a whole lot of commentary. And other parts we might really need to spend some time on. So we'll see as we go which parts need more commentary. Okay? And the important thing is, as we continue, you can always catch up. If you miss a class, that's fine. Don't worry about missing a class. But all of these are recorded, and they're all available online on YouTube shortly, the week or so after that we have them live. And so you can always catch up, okay? There's no problem. Just come into any class. We want you here. So that's the plan for studying the text. And as we begin, I just want to take a moment to think about, why do we study text like this? Like, what's the point of studying any text, And for me, the point of study is the same as the point of Dharma, which is to transform my mind, right? The whole reason I engage with the Dharma is to transform my mind. And by transforming my mind, I transform my life. And by transforming my life, I find a way to live in a meaningful way. I find meaning, right? I make my life meaningful. And that has to come by rearranging all of my harmful habits that I have perpetuated since beginning this time and adopting virtuous habits of being of service to others. And that, in order to do that with any sort of conviction, I actually have to understand the material and the teachings. I can't just be based on my teacher's advice alone. If someone says this is a good way to be, you should do this, then I might believe them. But to actually practice that long term and allow that to transform me in a meaningful way is very difficult because there's no foundation there. So we go to the actual texts themselves and we study the texts. And by studying, we develop an intellectual understanding of the text. And then once we have some intellectual understanding, we engage in the act of contemplation or reflection and we assess, do I actually understand this whole text? Do I have doubts about this text? Or do I have conviction about this text? Or this material, this topic, whatever it may be. So first we study, and then we contemplate and develop conviction. And then we actually have to meditate on these texts. We have to make these texts so they're inseparable from our minds. Whether that means it's a topic, a specific meditation topic that we become familiar with, or whether it is a virtuous quality, such as compassion or bodhicitta, that we're trying to cultivate and we're trying to use as our primary motivation to live in the world. So studying texts and receiving teachings is the first part, right, of a lifelong practice. And it's critical. If we don't understand the teachings, then putting them into practice is very difficult. So for me, study means to develop all the tools or start developing the tools I need to actually transform my mind. But study doesn't do anything if I don't also have practice. So I have to say, what is practice then? And ideally, study and practice are not separated, right? Studying the text and then living the text in a meaningful way are going to be two sides of the same coin. That is the whole point of our Dharma practice. If you're a great Dharma practitioner when you're sitting on a meditation cushion or when you're visiting the temple or the Dharma center, but then the rest of the time you're not, even thinking about it, then that's not very helpful, right? Maybe it's a little bit helpful, but not very helpful. The goal is to make our whole life Dharma, right? That the teachings and the understanding that we develop by studying and that we gain in our meditation practice, we bring that to every aspect of our life. And that doesn't mean we go around preaching. That doesn't mean we go around telling people how they should live their lives. But it means we go around living our life with the mind that says, my goal in this life is to be as most beneficial to other people as I can. And I understand that to do that, I have to tame my mind. So I want to always be observing my mind. What is motivating me? Am I motivated by self-cherishing? Am I motivated by self-grasping? Am I motivated by any of my reactionary emotions, such as attachment or anger or jealousy or pride? Or am I actually motivated because I want to help others in a meaningful way? Because I want to be of service? Because I have love and compassion and I want to develop equanimity for others? So that is something we should always be observing, right? And the only way we make that a natural habit is by studying, meditating, and then incorporating it into everything we do. So we shouldn't think of there's this division. Now I'm studying, now I'm practicing, okay? We recognize that the time I set aside during my day for study may be a block of time, sure. And then the time I set aside for actually physically meditating is distinct. But my practice encompasses both my study and my meditation and everything else in my life. Making dinner, going to work, going to the movies, hanging out with my friends, all of these things have to be part of my spiritual practice. And so especially beginning a text like this, the whole point of this text is that it is covering the entire breadth of the Buddhist teachings. But not just that, it's covering how do we actually go about practicing these in a sequence that is meaningful, a sequence that builds upon itself to make our practice get continually stronger and stronger and stronger. So since especially this is the material that we're going to be studying together on our Saturday afternoons and evenings, we really need to try to make this material meaningful to our whole lives, not just to our time together, right? So this is a Lamrim text, and Lamrim means stages of the path. And that phrase really came from Tsongkhapa, who composed this text. So here we say Janshuk Lamrim Dring. So Janshu means enlightenment, Lam is the path, and Rim means stages. So the stages the middle length stages of the path to enlightenment. What that means is, what's a path, right? First off, in a worldly sense, a path is something that brings us somewhere. A path is what's charting a course forward, that is showing us the way to go, you know? So we also, in the Buddhist concept, in our language, we talk about paths as types of mental realizations. And that's also true here. But the most important part is just the worldly idea of a path. What do we mean by path? We mean that which is showing us the way, that which is guiding us in the right direction. Okay. And the reason it's called the stages or a sequential path is exactly as I said. We're looking at all of the different meditation topics that the Buddha taught, but we're looking at them in a sequence that makes sense. When the Buddha taught, he taught whoever was in front of him. And so if you look at his teachings, one day he might be teaching incredibly highly realized practitioners, and the next day he might be teaching people who had never heard a single word of the Dharma before, and they had just wandered into the forest and they found him. Right? So his teachings are going to be different depending on the audience, because the whole point of the teachings is to transform the minds of the audience and to tame the mind of whoever's listening. So different students need different types of teachings. So as a result, if you look at the teachings of the Buddha, they aren't in a sequence, and not in an easy sequence, at least, that we can follow. So a number of different teachers have organized those teachings in a way that is useful for us to practice and to study. And one of those teachers was Atisha, Joe Atisha. Um, and he wasn't the first one to do this, but he was one of them. And what was uncommon about his presentation of this sequential teaching is that not only did he organize, this is where you start, right here in the middle of samsara, and then here's Buddhahood. These are the steps you take, the sequence. But he also categorized them as realizing some of those practices are shared in common with the small scope, the small scope practitioners. Some of those practices are shared in common with the medium scope practitioners, and some are uncommon to the highest scope practitioners. So he created this division and recognized the commonality of practices. So a small scope practitioner, or a small scope being, as they say, is someone whose only goal is to achieve a positive rebirth. That's their goal. And that is a worthwhile goal. It's a Buddhist goal, right? To achieve a positive rebirth so you can continue to practice the Dharma in the future. But that's the smallest of Buddhist goals. The medium scope practitioner has the goal of not simply achieving a positive rebirth, but escaping samsara entirely, right? Being free from samsara. They say that achieving a positive rebirth is like getting a nicer cell in the prison. Okay, maybe you have a better view, but you're still in samsara. I want to be free from samsara. So they're seeking the individual liberation of an arhat, right? Of being freed from samsara on their own. That is the medium scope. Now, the greatest scope, which is the scope that the Mahayana practitioners aspire to, is not only do I want to be free from the suffering of samsara for myself alone, but I want to become a Buddha, which will allow me to free all sentient beings from samsara. Not just me, every single sentient being. I want to free them from samsara. And that is the real motivation and scope and goal that we are aspiring to. And so there are uncommon practices and meditations that are in line with the great scope or the large scope practitioner. And so distinguishing the different practices into those three groupings and then seeing how the sequences build upon one another as you practice them from the beginning to the end was one of the uncommon innovations that Atisha brought to the stages of the path material. You know, if you look in other traditions, you'll see texts that are called not stages of the path, but instead stages of instruction or the stages of the teachings, right? And it's the same idea. It's organizing the Buddhist teachings in a way that makes sense for a sequential practice, but Atisha brought something different to it. And Tsongkhapa's text is a commentary on Atisha's text. Specifically, and this we'll talk about as we study today, but specifically on Atisha's text, a lamp for the path to enlightenment. Okay, so that text is 68 verses long, and as you can see, even our middle length Lamrim is a lot longer than that because Tsongkhapa goes into a whole lot of detail. Now, the special thing about this text specifically is that Tsongkhapa taught. He composed many texts, right? And of the texts he composed, there are 5 texts that teach emptiness in special and uncommon ways. And we're encouraged to study all of those texts. And especially, we're encouraged to study them in order, right? Because as Tsongkhapa continued to compose more texts, he talked about emptiness, which is the nature of reality, right? How things really exist and how to combat the self-grasping mind. He talked about it in more refined and different ways. So the first of those 5 texts that we study is the Lamrim Chenmo, so the great treatise on the stages of the path to enlightenment. That's the more expansive version of this text. Then the second text that he composed that we study is called Jane Leche Ningpo. So the essence of eloquent speech that is describing the interpretive and the definite, right? And that is a text that's exploring the distinction between the Chittamatra school and the Swatantrika Madhyamaka school and the Prasangika Madhyamaka school, right? So here at the monastery, whenever we study the Chittamatra perspective, we always start with that text. So that is the second of the texts. First is the Lamrim Chenmo, and second is the essence of good explanations. And then the third text we call Tsache Tikchen. It's also called the Ocean of Reasoning, I believe. And that is a commentary on Nagarjuna's text, the Mula Madhyamaka Karika. So Nagarjuna is famously, and we're going to talk about Nagarjuna today, is famously considered the trailblazer of the Madhyamaka lineage, the middle way philosophical tenet system, who was the first human to describe Shakyamuni Buddha's understanding of emptiness in the most correct and direct way, was Nagarjuna. So he was a few centuries after the Buddha. And one of his most famous texts is called Fundamental Wisdom. And Tsongkhapa's commentary on fundamental wisdom is the third text. It's called the title is the Ocean of Reasoning. The Tibetans never call it that. They just call it the Commentary on Fundamental Wisdom. It's actually Tikchen. Then the fourth text is this one. It's the middle length Lamrim. So this is the same material as the extensive Lamrim, and he's again a commentary on Atisha's text, but this one he is more concise and he doesn't have quite as many quotations, and he's really refining his ideas of what it means to put all these ideas in practice, all these meditative ideas into practice. So the way this text is written is to be more accessible even than the Lamrim Chenmo, the great treatise, right? That's why it's shorter and it isn't as filled with quite as much reasoning, because it tries to get right to the point of many of the topics. And this text is especially prized for its final section, which is its discussion of emptiness and its discussion of specifically, the last 2 of the 6 paramitas, which is the paramitas of the perfection of concentration and the perfection of wisdom. That is where he teaches about how to achieve single-pointed concentration and calm abiding, as well as special insight. And that's where he teaches emptiness in those sections, right? That's not going to come until the end of our time together. That's the very end of the text. But this text is especially known for teaching that in a very direct and clear way. And then the fifth text that we're encouraged to study by Tsongkhapa is called Umagompa Ramsel, or the Clarifying the Intent. And this is Tsongkhapa's commentary on Chandrakirti's text, the Madhyamaka Avatara. And the Madhyamaka Avatara, entering the middle way, is Chandrakirti's commentary on Nagarjuna himself, on the root verses, the fundamental verses of wisdom. So Tsongkhapa has more than one text that's commenting on the fundamental verses of wisdom. The first one, which I mentioned, Ocean of Reasoning, is commenting on it directly. And then the last one, Clarifying the Intent, Umagompa Ramsel, is commenting on the commentary of Nagarjuna's text, right? So these 5 texts are all really important for us to study, especially if we want to try to understand emptiness. So His Holiness Dalai Lama recommends that for those of us that are trying to incorporate emptiness and the understanding of emptiness into our everyday life, these texts are especially important to study. And the middle length Lamrim especially is uncommon, and it is direct, and it is easy to understand. And so with that, I think we'll start. Now, this text that we have, and now you all should have a PDF of, is not only does it have the Lamrim, the source text by Tsongkhapa, it also has a series of all of the outlines that were added later by Trijang Rinpoche. So the Trijang Rinpoche, who was the tutor for the Dalai Lama. So if you look through the text, you'll see there are a lot of outlines that are added in. And the way we study especially is the outlines are quite important. It helps us organize the text. And even the Tibetan versions of this text that we get copies of these days will have these outlines as well added in. Now, some of these outlines are from Tsongkhapa himself, but some of the more detailed ones come from Trijang Rinpoche that he added afterward. He looked at the text and he identified all of the different sections and he created this outline. And the reason you do that is it's easier to memorize a text when you know the outline of it. And then it's easier to see the big picture of how all of the different elements of a text work together when you know the whole outline of the text. So these outlines are important. I may not be reading all of them as I go, depending on where they are in the text. But we'll see as we go. And the other thing to note is that this text often is called the small stages of the path text. Even though we call it the middle length Lamrim, it's often called the small Lamrim, especially by Tibetans. And if they often don't even call it the Lamrim, they call it the small text on calm abiding and special insight. Right? That's just the shorthand name for it. Now, we do say that Tsongkhapa also composed other Lamrim texts that are even shorter, such as the Song of Experience. And because of that, we say the Song of Experience is this poem, this Lamrim poem. That is the short Lamrim. This is the middle length Lamrim. And then the Great Treatise is the Great Treatise. But this one will sometimes be called the small Lamrim as well. So it can be confusing, right? So if you hear that you're studying that the important thing to study from Tsongkhapa is the small treatise on special insight, it actually means this one, even though this is the middle length Lamrim. Because we can't make anything too easy, right? A text that is especially clear and easy to understand, we have to make something confusing about it, such as we'll give it more than one title. Why not? So we start with prostration, right? And you see this in every text you study. Now, if it's a text that has been translated from Sanskrit into Tibetan, then that prostration is the translator's prostration first. And that translator's prostration will indicate what category of text this is, which of the topics it is included among, whether it is a text that would be included in the basket of the Vinaya, which is the ethical and monastic discipline, or included in the basket of Sutra, or included in the basket of Abhidharma. Right? So when you have a translator, then the translator's homage at the beginning will indicate that. Here, this text was composed in Tibetan, so we don't have a translator's homage or prostration. It just begins with Tsongkhapa. So he begins his text by saying, "Respectfully, I prostrate at the feet of the venerable saints who are full of great compassion." And so here, the venerable saints are all of the teachers that preceded him, as well as all of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Right? But especially, he's talking about Manjushri, who is the Buddha of wisdom. And even though he's the Buddha of wisdom, he is endowed with great compassion because he's a Buddha. So even though he is respectfully prostrating to all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, he's especially meaning or indicating that it is Manjushri, because Manjushri embodies the realization of the nature of reality. Right? He is the Buddha that embodies wisdom. But being filled with great compassion shows these two aspects of our practice, right? The practice of accumulating wisdom and accumulating merit. So we'll see that over and over and over again. And as you have been practicing and studying on your own for a long time, you know that we talk about the two accumulations, the accumulation of merit and the accumulation of wisdom. And the accumulation of merit is all of the practices that fall into the category of skillful means, which means compassion and bodhicitta. So all of the practices that fall into that category are considered the accumulation of merit. We need those to go hand in hand with the accumulation of wisdom, which is all of the practices that are about understanding emptiness and the nature of reality. And so emptiness and compassion, or emptiness and bodhicitta, those two things, we always have to hold them together, and they're not separate. We study them separately, but by doing so, they mutually reinforce one another, right? So we need both. Just like a bird needs two wings to fly, we need to develop both merit and wisdom. And that's all reflected in this opening homage. And now he says that this middling text has 3 points: the introductory section, the actual text itself, and then the conclusion, the concluding explanation. The introductory section has 3 points. And the first one is the homage. And then that is followed by the promise to compose. So you see this in almost every text. They start by paying homage to specific Buddhas or Bodhisattvas or to teachers. And depending on who they pay homage to, that shows you what is motivating their text. And then they always will say, "This is why I am writing this text," right? Sometimes it's not explicit. Sometimes it's implicit, but here we also have it explicitly. So that's going to be at the beginning of any text you study. They'll be paying homage to specific Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and teachers, and then they'll be saying why they composed this text. And then often in that section as well, in addition to that, to the promise to compose, is why this text is being composed. And generally, the texts are being composed always for the same reason, which is for the students to study this material, to gain realizations, to become Buddhas, to benefit other sentient beings. That's always, we call it the Göpa, right? There's the Göpa, which is the purpose, and the Nirgö, the ultimate purpose, you could say. And the ultimate purpose is always the same, which is for the students to become Buddhas. Uh, and then the Göpa, the purpose is always to understand whatever the material is that they're talking about. But it's still always included in the opening part of a text. Bhagwan, lord of this field of fortitude, the Jina's regent Jamgon, lord of the Dharma, Manjughosha, sole father of all the Sugatas, Nagarjuna and Asanga, foretold by the Jina, bowing to you with respect, I shall once more explain here in a summary fashion the stages of the path of profound view and vast conduct for the sake of making it easy to access. So here in these two verses, he includes everything I just mentioned. So first, who is he making prostrations to? First, to the Buddha, who he calls the Bhagwan, the Blessed One, right? Lord of this field of fortitude. This field of fortitude is another way to describe our realm of existence. That's all that's pointing to. But here, by calling him the Lord of this place, he's actually making prostrations to all of the holy qualities of the body, speech, and mind of all the Buddhas, right? So he's paying homage to the body, speech, and mind of all the Buddhas. And then the Jina's regent, Gyalten, Jamgun. So this is Maitreya. So the second one he's paying homage to is Maitreya, who is the Lord of Dharma. And then Manjughosha or Manjushri, the Buddha of wisdom. And the reason he's paying homage to those two are because Maitreya is considered the head of the lineage of the of Karisana, vast conduct or expansive conduct. And Manjushri is the head of the lineage of profound view, which I'll talk about in a moment. So those are the two aspects. And then Nagarjuna is the teacher who, following after Manjushri, is the trailblazer who taught the profound view, and he's the next in the lineage of the profound view. And Asanga is following Maitreya as the head human lineage holder of the vast conduct lineage. And so he says, I shall once more explain here in a summary fashion the stages of the path of the profound view and the vast conduct. So what do those mean? Just as we were saying, vast conduct is all of those practices that are associated with bodhicitta, compassion, the perfections, and accumulating merit. And the profound view are all of those practices associated with understanding the nature of reality, with realizing emptiness, with developing wisdom, right? So we see those two different paths constantly intertwining. And one of them, the profound view, the path of profound view, is headed up by Manjushri, and then underneath him, Nagarjuna, and then Nagarjuna students, going down to Shantideva and so forth. And the vast conduct, the path of vast conduct, or expansive conduct, it's sometimes translated as, is starting with Maitreya. And then from Maitreya, it goes to Asanga. From Asanga, there is Vasubandhu and his other disciples and students, and then eventually down to us as well. And so by paying homage to these Buddhas and these trailblazers, as they're called, in his opening verse, he's showing you that the whole purpose of this text is that it's going to cover the entire expanse of the Buddhist teachings. It's not going to focus on just one topic or another, but it's going to cover every single element of Dharma practice, and it's going to weave them in and out of each other to show that they're inseparable. These two paths, the path of the profound view and the path of vast conduct. And the reason he is doing it, the purpose, is to make it easy to access, to make these teachings something that we can apply to our everyday life, right? If the teachings are too intellectual, then it's hard to realize them. It's hard to apply them. So the whole purpose of this text is so that Tsongkhapa students can understand how to put into practice all the teachings of the Buddha. So then the next section is the general introduction to the instruction as it is taught here. The teachings to be explained here consist in how the fortunate are led to the level of Buddhahood through the stages of the path to enlightenment. They summarize all of the points of the Victor scriptures, following the tradition of the two great trailblazers, Nagarjuna and Asanga. They constitute the Dharma system of supreme beings who progress to the state of omniscience, and they contain all the stages without omission that the three types of beings need to practice. So here, the victor is the English translation of the Jina, or the Gyewa, the conqueror, the Buddha, who has conquered all afflictions, right? And this is saying that this text itself, it is teaching us how to achieve the ground of Buddhahood, and it is summarizing all of the important parts that come from these two trailblazers, right? The reason they're called trailblazers is because Nagarjuna is considered the trailblazer of the Madhyamaka system, and Asanga is actually the trailblazer of the Chittamatra system, because they were the two scholars who first showed how the Buddha taught those philosophical views without relying upon any other commentary or any previous human scholarship. Right? They're the ones that opened the door to understanding those two philosophical tenet systems and those two ways of understanding the world. Right? So Nagarjuna is the trailblazer of the Madhyamaka system, and Asanga is the trailblazer of the Chittamatra system. So that's why they're called trailblazers, because they broke new ground. Now, the Buddha taught those systems. They aren't the first ones to teach it, but they're the first ones to give an expansive understanding of it, not relying upon any other human commentary. They're only relying upon the direct teachings of the Buddha. And it says that all the stages are going to be contained in this text without omission. So he's making a promise that everything you need is going to come from this text. And not only, and it's aimed at all three types of beings. So that's saying that the beings who are of the small scope, of the medium scope, and of the great scope. Or you could also say the Shravakas, or the Pratyeka Buddhas, or the Bodhisattvas. However you want to categorize the three types of beings. All of the practices for all of the different types of beings are going to be included in this text. So it's not just focused on one type of student, but on all students who are seeking to become Buddhists. So that's the general introduction to the text. Next is the actual explanation of the text. And this also has 2 points, 2 sections. The first is the correspondence with the matter of explanation proposed by the scholars. So what this is showing, here, I'll read it, then I'll explain. Scholars of the glorious Vikramasila monastery considered it vital to start off with the 3 preliminaries: the greatness of the author of the teachings, the greatness of the teachings, and the way to explain and listen to them. So what Tsongkhapa is doing is he is explaining that before I even get into explaining all of the path that the Buddha taught, in order for this text to be complete, I need to show you where this text came from, because we need to have conviction that what I'm saying is not something I just made up, right? So he recognizes that he's commenting on Atisha's text, on the lamp for the path to enlightenment. And so in order to make this text useful and to allow students to have conviction in it, first he's going to explain a little bit about Atisha and of Atisha's good qualities, so you can have confidence in Atisha. And then he'll talk about the text that Atisha composed, that he is using as the basis for this text. And then he's going to talk about how to then apply this text. So in Vikramashila, which is one of the 2 major monastic centers in India, the other one being Nalanda, this was a standard that was expected. If you are going to be composing a text, at the beginning of the text, in order to validate that this text has a worthwhile place and that should be followed, in order to make sure that all the students know this text has a lineage, it isn't something you just made up, you include these sections in the beginning. So we're starting with learning about the greatness of the author of the text. Now, of course, that doesn't mean Tsongkhapa's talking about himself. He's talking about the text that he is writing a commentary to, right? And so that is showing that our text here is in alignment with the expectations of Vikramashila Monastery. Now, actually, in Tsongkhapa's text, he divides those 3 qualities a little bit different. So the actual guide to the stages of the path to enlightenment has 4 parts. The first part is showing the greatness of the author in order to show that the teachings have a reliable source. Then showing the greatness of the teachings in order to generate the respect for those instructions. 3, how the teachings that possess those two greatnesses should be listened to and explained. And then 4, the stages by which a student should be guided through the actual instructions. So those two greatnesses are what he focuses on, and then how to study them and how to apply them. The greatness of the author and the greatness of the text. The author to inspire, to let us know that this teaching has a reliable source, and the greatness of the text itself to generate respect. And then how to study that text, how to apply what you've studied. So showing the greatness of the author in order to show that the teachings have a reliable source itself has 2 points. The first point is talking about the root text and the actual author of the root text. Generally speaking, the present instructions are the ones that the Venerable Protector Maitreya gives in his Ornament of Clear Realizations, the Abhisamaya Alamkara, as they are also based on, in particular, on the Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment. Its author is also the author of the present text. Under the name of the great master Dibamkara Srijnana, he is also widely known as the glorious Atisha. So what he's saying is that everything in this text actually is contained in the Abhisamaya Alamkara, the lamp for the path to enlightenment. And that is a text that we say was composed by Maitreya and then given to Asanga in a meditative realization when Asanga went to Maitreya's realm. He's saying everything here is actually based in that text, but more specifically, it's a commentary on Atisha's text. And since it's a commentary on Atisha's text, then Atisha himself is like the author of this text that I'm writing. I'm writing it, but Atisha is the author. He is the composer of it because it is all based on his text. So we often know him as Atisha. That's what we call him. The name he was given when he ordained is Dibamkara Srijnana. And actually, it talks about that, so I'll give a commentary when that comes up. Because first, we're going to talk about the greatness of Atisha. And this itself has 3 points. How Atisha took birth in an excellent family, how he attained his positive qualities, and once he obtained those, how he performed deeds to benefit the teachings of the Buddha. So how Atisha took birth in an excellent family. According to the translator's praise, so here translator is referencing Nakso Lotsoa, who was one of the Tibetans who met Atisha when he came to Tibet and was one of the early primary translators that helped Atisha learn Tibetan and translate texts into Tibetan. And he himself wrote this extensive praise of Atisha as one of his direct students. And so this is a quote from that praise by Nakso Lotsoa, who we often just we refer to him as the translator, which is Lotsoa in Tibetan. So this is talking about how Atisha took birth. Due east in the excellent country of Zahor, which is current-day Bengal, due east in the excellent country of Zahor lives a city of great size, namely Vikramanipura. In its midst, the royal court, an extremely spacious palace, called the One with Golden Banners. Its pleasures, might, and wealth resemble those of Chinese emperors. King of that land is Kalyana Shri, and his queen is Shri Prabha. The royal couple has 3 sons, Padmagarbha, Chandragarbha, and Srigarbha, they are called. Again, Prince Padmagarbha has 5 royal consorts and 9 sons. The oldest one, named Punyashri, is a Mahapandita, widely known as Dhanashri. His youngest brother, called Srigarbha, is the Bhikshu Virya Chandra. The middle one is Chandragarbha. He is our exalted guru. So this is showing us that Atisha was born a prince. His father was the king of this region of what is current-day Bengal. He lived in a palace. He was the middle of 3 sons, and he was born a prince. So he was born in the lap of luxury, which gave him the opportunity to study, but it also, parallel to Shakyamuni Buddha, right? It made him have luxury. So he had to seek out study on his own. He had to realize that there was more to life than living in the pleasure of a palace. And so we can be inspired that even though he had all of the delights he could ever want, he chose instead to seek out a life of monasticism and a life of teaching the Dharma to benefit other sentient beings. So how did Atisha attain his positive qualities? This has 2 points. The first is how he obtained the positive qualities of comprehending scriptural knowledge. By the age of 21, having studied the 4 areas of common knowledge to the Buddhists and non-Buddhists alike, which is language, logic, crafts, and medicine, Chandragarbha had become an excellent scholar. In particular, the great Drolungpa relates how, at the age of 15, having heard the text A Drop of Reasoning, just once, Chandragarbha debated with a non-Buddhist intellectual who had been renowned for his erudition, and he beat him, which spread his fame far and wide. Then, so that is how he studied the text from a young age, right? And by the age of 21, he'd already mastered so many of the preliminary texts, the texts that are common to Buddhists and non-Buddhists. But here it's saying how even at age 15, he defeated a non-Buddhist in a debate, having only studied one text, the Drop of Reasoning, which is a logic text, a text on pramana. That's how erudite he was, even at a young age. Then Chandragarbha requested a complete empowerment from the master yogi of the main temple on Black Mountain, the glorious Rahula Gupta, who had received direct visions of Hevajra and a prophecy from Vajradakini. Chandragarbha was given the secret name of Jnana Guhya Vajra. Up until the age of 29, he studied the Vajrayana, which is to say he studied Tantra for those 8 years, under the numerous highly realized gurus, and thereby became knowledgeable in all texts and became knowledgeable in all texts and in all instructions. When the thought, only I am knowledgeable, in secret mantra occurred to him, the Dakinis appeared to him and pointed out in a dream several volumes of mantra that he had never seen before, and that whereby his pride was diminished. So from the age of 21 to 29 is when he started studying Tantra, right? So he'd been studying extensively before he started studying Tantra. And his primary teacher of Tantra was this Tantra practitioner named Rahula Gupta, who lived in the Black Mountain, which is near where he was from. And his main text practice there was Hevajra. But that wasn't his only teacher. Through those 8 years, he studied with many different tantric teachers, though Rahula Gupta was his primary one. And he developed a sense of pride. He said, I know everything. I figured this out, right? I know what's going on now. No one knows more than me about this. And he had a dream where the Dakinis appeared to him and said, you know what? Look at all these texts that you've never heard of before. And he realized that it was the Dakinis helping him defeat his own self-cherishing mind and his pride. What I love about this is it shows us how very human he was. And it shows us that all of us can get trapped, right? By any of our afflictive minds. That someone like Atisha developed pride because of his intellect. But luckily, he was open to receiving the criticism that says, you don't know everything, to take a step back, right? So the problem with many of us is that we follow our afflictions, but we don't want to hear the criticism. But Atisha shows us that it's possible to be incredibly well realized, still be under the sway of the negative minds, such as your ego or your pride, and then have the opportunity to realize that and then take a step back from it. So after he had been studying for many years, and he studied Tantra for 8 years, then he became ordained. Both in his dreams and directly, the gurus and the protectors then made known to Chandragarbha that the vast benefit would accrue for the teachings and for many migrating beings if he were to take ordination, as appropriate. Upon their encouragement, he had himself ordained. The great upholder of the monastic discipline, Srila Rakshita, an elder of the Mahasamgika tradition, who had attained the meditative stabilization in which one single-pointedly enters ultimate reality on the path of preparation, officiated as the abbot, and Chandragarbha received the name Sri Dipamkara Jnana. So he ordained as a Mahasamgika, right? So at that point, there were 4 different lineages of monastic ordination. The Mahasamgika was one of them. But the main lineage of monastic ordination in Tibet was what's known as, or still is known as, the Sarvastivadins, or the Mulla Sarvastivadins. There were 2 others at the time of Atisha as well, the Strivada, as well as the Samitya. Okay, so there are 4 different lineages of monastic ordination. And keeping your ordination pure is important. So when Atisha came to Tibet, he didn't ordain any monks. And that was at the request of Trungpa Trungpa, as well as his other disciples, is don't offer ordination because we already have the Sarvastivadin lineage here of ordination. And you follow a different lineage. And because of that, if you ordain anyone, then we'll have 2 different lineages at the same time in one place. And that is one of the causes to divide the Sangha, which is very dangerous, right? So that is why it's important to recognize your monastic lineage and to not allow for multiple lineages or to hope that there aren't multiple lineages in one place. So in the Tibetan tradition, all the Tibetan monks and any Tibetan ordination at all is in the Mulla Sarvastivadin tradition. These days, the East Asian communities follow a different monastic lineage, and the Theravada communities have a different monastic lineage as well, right? So Atisha wasn't from the main monastic lineage that we now practice in Tibet. That didn't make it an obstacle for him to visit and to teach, but it did mean it was an obstacle for him not being able to ordain anyone in Tibet. And his name, Sri Dibamkara Jnana, Sri means glorious, right, or exalted. Dibamkara, there's some debate about this. Deepam has to do with a butter lamp or a light, right? And kara means to cause. It comes from the verbal root kr, to cause or to make or to do. So to make something enlightened, not enlightened like Buddhahood enlightened, but to actually bring light to something, like a light bringer. And then jnana means exalted wisdom. So the glorious exalted wisdom who brings about the light, which illuminates all of the teachings of the Buddha, is kind of the way we understand his name. Though often he is just called the elder or the great Atisha or Jowo in Tibetan, right? When they say his name in Tibetan, Dibamkara Jnana is often not translated into Tibetan. It's written in Sanskrit letters. Then, afterwards, up until the age of 31, he studied the lower and the upper divisions of the inner philosophical knowledge. In particular, for 12 years, he studied the great detailed explanation under Guru Dhammarakshita in Odantapuri. And as he was very well versed in the scriptures of the four original traditions, he had an infallible grasp of the tiniest details of the modes of behavior that should be adopted and discarded according to the various philosophical schools, for instance, the monastic rules about accepting gifts and so on. So when we talk about the upper and lower divisions of inner philosophical knowledge, that's talking about the different tenet systems that we have that the Buddha taught. So we know the Buddha taught 4 different tenet systems, right? He taught the Vaibhashika system, the Sautrantika system, the Chittamatra system, and the Madhyamaka system. And now there are subdivisions of those, but those are the 4 main tenet systems. The Vaibhashikas and the Sautrantikas are what are known as the lower divisions. They're both Hinayana tenet systems. And the Chittamatra and the Madhyamaka are the Mahayana tenet systems. And the major difference between them, there are many small differences, but the biggest difference comes one, the Mahayana tenet systems have bodhicitta as one of their as the prime motivating factor, whereas the Hinayana systems do not. The Hinayana tenet systems are aimed not at Buddhahood, but they're aimed at achieving personal liberation from samsara. And the way you understand selflessness is different. That's the most important thing. They're different philosophical schools. It's not just they have different motivations, whether it's bodhicitta or renunciation, but instead they actually understand selflessness differently. Now, one of the marks of being a Buddhist is accepting that all phenomena are selfless and empty, right? We say there are the 4 marks that define what it means to be Buddhist in terms of you, which is duche tamche mitakpa. All compounded phenomena are impermanent. Zakshe tamche dugnawa. All contaminated phenomena are suffering. So that means our contaminated aggregates. So all of our body and mind that are generated due to the force of karma and delusion, those are what's considered contaminated aggregates. Those are themselves suffering. That's the second point. All compounded phenomena are impermanent. All contaminated phenomena are suffering. And then chunnam dakme tang tompa. So all phenomena are selfless and they're empty. And then nyanyan lede shiwayins. And then achieving nirvana is peace. That's the last one. So that third one, all phenomena are selfless and empty. All Buddhist schools accept that. But how they define those terms are different. And so the lower schools, the Vaibhashika and the Sautrantika, don't accept emptiness, right? They accept selflessness of persons, but they don't accept selflessness of phenomena. So when they say everything is selfless and empty, they are understanding that to mean 2 different levels of selflessness of persons, a coarse level and a more subtle level. The Chittamatras believe that there's selflessness of phenomena and selflessness of persons, both. And so the word empty is referencing selflessness of phenomena. And similarly, the Madhyamaka believe that the word empty is referencing the most subtle type of selflessness of both phenomena and persons. And selfless is referencing the coarse type. Now, that is going to be explained in detail when we get to the wisdom chapter, which will be at the very end of all of our teachings together. But the way the 4 different philosophical schools understand emptiness or selflessness is one of the most important differences. And if we want to be able to understand the nature of reality, it's important for us, as it was important for Atisha, to understand what all of the different schools believe, because all of them are Buddhist views, but that some of them were appropriate for those type of students, but they weren't representing the Buddha's final view. However, the final view is very subtle. It's very hard to understand. And one of the best ways for us to understand it completely is to understand all the things that are very similar to it, but not quite correct, if that makes sense, right? And so by understanding the other philosophical schools, that gives us a better clarification of what we actually believe as Prasangika Madhyamakas. And so Atisha himself did that. And here it mentions he studied especially the great detailed explanation, the the Mahavibhasha. That is the main text of the Vaibhashika school, the lowest tenet system. And he studied it with Dhammarakshita in Odantapuri. Now, those of you who've been coming to our Saturday classes, that Dhammarakshita is the one who composed the Lojong texts that we've been studying, right? So Dhammarakshita actually was a Vaibhashika in terms of view, in terms of the way he understood the nature of reality. And Odantapuri is a monastic center that is in Indonesia, I believe. It doesn't exist anymore, obviously. Um, and even though he was a Vaibhashika and he held that view of selflessness, inherently he had this quality of bodhicitta that was so profound that he had achieved the realization of bodhicitta and was a bodhisattva. And he was one of Atisha's 3 teachers who taught him bodhicitta. And he's the one that composed the Peacock in the Poison Grove and the Wheel of Sharp Weapons. The Wheel of Sharp Weapons being the text that we just finished studying last Saturday. So that is who that Guru Dhammarakshita is. So this is showing that Atisha didn't just study the final view. He studied all of the different types of philosophical systems that the Buddha taught. And by doing that, he's able to compare them and understand all of the fine details of all of them. And then from there, develop a clear understanding of the ultimate meaning of the Buddha's thought. So how Atisha attained the qualities of realization in its correct accomplishment. As generally speaking, all of the scriptural teachings of the victor are contained in the 3 precious scriptural collections. The realized teachings are also contained in the 3 precious trainings. So we have the scriptural teachings and the realized teachings, right? And what that means, we say when the Buddha taught, the Buddha's teachings have 2 qualities, the ones that are scriptural teachings or realized teachings. I think this is explained below, so maybe I won't give too much commentary here because it's going to come down. It's going to happen. It's going to be explained in the text itself. But what are the 3 scriptural collections? So we say all of the Buddhist teachings can be contained within these 3 categories, right? Of the Vinaya, which are all the teachings that are relating to monastic discipline and ethical discipline. And then the Sutra, which are all the teachings that are relating to concentration and realization. And then Abhidharma, which are specifically teachings related to wisdom and also to cosmology, right? So all of the Buddhist teachings would fall into those 3 categories of Vinaya, Sutra, and Abhidharma. And at the same time, we say that there are the 3 precious trainings or the 3 higher trainings. So we can say that all of the Buddhist teachings are also contained within the idea of training in ethics, training in concentration, and training in wisdom. And so those 3, the 3 higher trainings, line up to the 3 types of scriptural baskets. So the training of moral discipline lines up to the Vinaya teachings, and then the training of meditative stabilization, or Tingizin, meditative concentration, lines up with all of the Sutra teachings, and the higher training of wisdom lines up with the Abhidharma teachings, right? And so when I had mentioned before, whenever a text is translated from Sanskrit, the translator will have an homage at the beginning. And if it says homage to the youthful Manjushri, then you know that this text is contained within all of the teachings that are part of the Abhidharma, the wisdom teachings, right? They have to do with the higher training of wisdom. If he says homage to all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, then it is a text that is included within the Sutra tradition of meditative stabilization, the higher training of meditative stabilization, and so on, right? They have those distinctions. So continuing, how Atisha trained in ethics, meditative stabilization, and wisdom. Atisha's accomplishments in the training of ethics. So here it's talking about how he achieved different vows, right? In this regard, the training in ethics is often praised in the scriptures and in the commentaries as the foundation of all positive qualities, such as the trainings in meditative stabilization and wisdom. Therefore, it is necessary, first of all, to possess qualities of realization in terms of the training in ethics. So here it's saying that if you want to achieve anything on this path of Buddhahood, especially anything contained within the higher training of meditative realization, or excuse me, meditative stabilization, or the higher training of wisdom, you have to have the foundation of ethics. Moral discipline or ethical discipline is considered the foundation upon which we build the rest of our understanding. That's really important. If we just jump into the more exciting teachings, right, then it's like building a house without building a basement, without building a foundation. You know, one monsoon season comes and the whole thing is going to fall down. We need to start with ethical discipline. And so ethical discipline is how we take up vows. We take up the pratimoksha vows, right? And that the pratimoksha vows includes all the vows of a layperson as well as a monk or a nun. And then we take up the bodhisattva vows, and then we take up tantric vows. Those are all the different ways that we engage in practicing ethical discipline. Okay. And then from there, when we study the text, there are specific teachings on morality and teachings of how we protect our mind so we can practice morality. But the basis is taking up these vows. So here it says, after having received the vows of a fully ordained monk, so this is Atisha receiving his vows of individual liberation, right? The pratimoksha vows. Atisha guarded them the way a yak would guard its coat. A yak is so attached to its coat that it would rather risk its life trying to save a strand of tail hair caught on a tree than to part with it, even if it sees that its life is being threatened by a hunter. That is how Atisha guarded every detail of the foundation of trainings, not to speak of the major rules of the foundation of trainings that he had undertaken, so that he came to be called the elder who is a great upholder of monastic discipline. So this is a wonderful little Buddhist analogy that they say yaks are so proud of their beautiful coats that if their tail gets caught in a shrub, then they see a hunter, they will not run away if it means ripping out the fur of their tail. That's how proud they are of their coats. And so in the same way, Atisha was so, he felt that there was such importance to every single one of his vows as a fully ordained monk, that even the smallest, the smallest vow, he kept it incredibly powerfully, very strongly. And so he became known as someone who is the great upholder of monastic discipline. Atisha practiced numerous instructions for training in the mind of enlightenment. So this is him achieving his bodhisattva vows, right? Which is rooted in love and compassion, especially following Serlingpa. He trained for long in the highest instructions passed on by the Venerable Maitreya and Manjughosha through Asanga and Shantideva. Thereby, the mind of enlightenment, which cherishes others more than oneself, arose in his heart. This aspiring mind of enlightenment gave rise to the engaging mind of enlightenment. This, and due to his excellent behavior, his engagement in the trainings, following the promise to train in the vast conduct of the bodhisattvas, he never once transgressed the rules of the Buddha's children. So here, after he took bodhisattva vows, he studied especially with Serlingpa, as we said. So Serlingpa, who is also known as Dharmakirti Shri, was the man from the Golden Isle, right, in Sumatra. So Atisha went to Sumatra for 12 years to study with Serlingpa. And that's the main place that he studied bodhicitta. He also studied with two teachers in India, one of them being Dhammarakshita, and the other one being Maitri Yogi. Those are the three teachers that taught him bodhicitta, that were his main teachers of bodhicitta, two in India and one in Serling, in Sumatra. But the main one is Serlingpa, the man from Sumatra. And he trained in all those teachings, Serlingpa holding the lineage, as we say, that came from Maitreya and Manjughosha, which is to say Manjushri, through Asanga and Shantideva. So even as he's talking about studying compassion and bodhicitta, he's putting it in reference to both wisdom and the two paths, right? The path of vast conduct and the path of the profound view. So even though it's bodhicitta, it still is incorporating the idea of emptiness, the idea of the nature of reality. Nothing is independent. And then it says he achieved first the aspiring mind of enlightenment and then the engaging mind of enlightenment. So the aspiring mind of enlightenment is the bodhicitta that is acting on its own, right? It's like the wish to engage in the benefit of others. So bodhicitta, right? I'm sure we know this, but bodhicitta is the mind that aspires to become Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. It's a mind that comes directly from great compassion as its primary cause, And its object is all sentient beings and the suffering of all sentient beings. And its aim is to achieve perfect, complete Buddhahood, but not for oneself, instead for the benefit of others, to eliminate their suffering. That's the mind of bodhicitta, right? And when that is completely uncontrived, it doesn't require meditative effort of any sort, it is always existent in your mind stream, then that's actual bodhicitta, also called the mind of awakening or the Mahayana mind of awakening. And that is when you become a bodhisattva, is when you actually achieve uncontrived bodhicitta. So most of us are just, we have a facsimile of bodhicitta. When we are able to meditate and develop some sort of sense of that wish to become Buddhist to benefit others, that's not quite actual bodhicitta, not yet, but it's moving in that direction, right? That's how we get there, is by having contrived bodhicitta or fabricated bodhicitta that takes effort. And then eventually it takes less and less effort until we actually realize actual bodhicitta. So in actual bodhicitta, there are two types. There is the aspiring bodhicitta and the engaging bodhicitta. And the big distinction between them is engaging bodhicitta, you have to have bodhisattva vows in order to have engaging bodhicitta. That's one thing. You don't have to have bodhisattva vows to have aspiring bodhicitta. And then the other one is that engaging bodhicitta occurs manifest simultaneously with other practices of the six perfections. So our kind of colloquial understanding, especially for us who don't have actual bodhicitta, the difference between wishing bodhicitta or aspiring bodhicitta and engaged bodhicitta is like the difference between wanting to go to the store and then actually walking to the store, right? They both have the mind that has the goal of going to the store, but one of them is more conceptual and one of them is actually put into practice. In the same way, our bodhicitta, as fabricated bodhicitta, has that kind of aspect. One is more aspirational, and one is we're actually doing something with that mind. In the mind of a bodhisattva, the distinction is whether that mind of bodhicitta is concurrent, manifest with any of the other perfections or any other activity associated with the perfections. And so it says, as he achieved both of these types of bodhicitta, so we say in the Prasangika, your bodhicitta can change. It goes back and forth. So especially in a bodhisattva who is an Arya bodhisattva, who is in meditative equipoise on the nature of reality, then their bodhicitta at that point is not engaged bodhicitta because it is not manifest in their continuum. It is, how do you say, badanyawa? It is subdued. The only manifest mind you have when you're in meditative equipoise on the nature of reality is that meditative equipoise. Nothing else is manifest for sentient beings. The Buddhas are different. But as a sentient being, an Arya sentient being who has realized the nature of reality, when they're in meditative equipoise, then that's the only manifest mind they have. So their bodhicitta at that point is not manifest, and therefore it is aspiring bodhicitta. Then as soon as they exit that meditative equipoise, then their bodhicitta once again becomes engaged bodhicitta. So it isn't like once you achieve one, you lose the other. They're constantly working back and forth. At least that's the way we understand it. And here it says he never transgressed the rules of the Buddha's children. So once he had bodhisattva vows, so there are 18 root vows and there are 64 secondary vows. He didn't break a single one once he took those vows. Continuing, we say, owing to the fact that he had the meditative stabilizations of the generation stage, which is one's own body is seen as that of a deity, and of the completion stage, which is the indestructible Vajra mind, he became chief among yogis. In particular, he guarded his tantric commitments properly by not transgressing the prescribed rules. So, in tantric practice, there are two stages of realization. The first is the generation stage, realization and practice, and then the second is the completion stage, realization and practice. And he achieved both those stages. And in order to achieve those, you have to have tantric vows. So he never once broke any of his tantric vows as well. Now, it does say that he was so, we look to Lama Atisha as our example for how strongly he protected all of his vows, that if he even thought that he had transgressed even the most minor of vow in the most minor of ways, he would stop whatever he was doing to immediately engage in some sort of remedial action to rectify that vow. So there's a story of how he was riding somewhere on a horse and he had a thought that he had broken some vow. So he jumped off the horse and he made a mandala out of mud, and he immediately made that mandala as an offering as a remedial action to develop regret and to repair the broken vow that he had made, right? To request the repair of this broken vow. So even though he says that My pratimoksha vows and my bodhisattva vows are stable, but I break the tantric vows like falling rain. That's what he says. We don't know if as a student, I don't know if I believe that. I think that's an exaggeration, but it does show that the tantric vows are hard to keep because there are many of them. And it's important that we always exert our fullest effort to keep all of our sets of vows because they build upon each other and they serve as the foundation for our strong practice of morality, which itself is the foundation for engaging in or for realizing all the teachings of the Buddha. So if you're a layperson, then you have the pratimoksha vows of a layperson, right? Those are the 5 vows. And then on top of that, you have the bodhisattva vows. And then if you've taken tantric initiation into a yoga tantra or highest yoga tantra initiation, then you'll have the tantric vows on top of that. And those represent your outer behavior, your inner behavior, and your secret behavior. All 3 of which are combined in order to develop our mind, prepare our mind to understand all the teachings of the Buddha and to progress towards Buddhahood. This text contains all the teachings of the Buddha, right? Which includes Tantra. But Tantra is like the 2 pages at the very end. Okay? So Tantra is not very well explained in this text. And that's not really the purpose of it. It's included because it's recognized that Tantra is you practice Tantra as part of your completion of the paramita practices, right? Tantra comes at the end of that. But this text is focused on paramita practice. So Tantra just comes right at the end. I think there's 2 or 3 pages right at the end. So even though hypothetically this text does, and that's the same for a teacher's text. A teacher's text has 1 line, right, about Tantra, the root text. So it does contain all the practices all the way to Buddhahood, but it's focused on the sutra practices, not the Tantra practices. Those are just mentioned in passing. But here, in order to develop conviction in a teacher's good qualities, we have to know that he was an expert in Tantra, even if this text isn't based in Tantra. So not only did he courageously undertake the training and ethics of the 3 vows, the pratimoksha, bodhisattva, and tantric vows, he also upheld them as he had promised. He kept the vows without transgressing the rules associated with them, and even if he transgressed them ever so slightly, he very quickly purified this by means of a suitable ritual restoring the given vow. So there are different rituals depending on the vow you break. You know, as monks, we go to sojong, which is a restoring purification practice we do twice a month. But whatever vow he broke, even in the smallest way, he wouldn't wait. He'd immediately restore it. So that's inspiration for us that we should be practicing the four opponent powers every day to, even if it's not a vow that we've broken, any non-virtuous activity that we've done, we want to purify that as quickly as possible so that our foundation, the moral discipline that is the foundation for our whole practice, always remains stable and complete and isn't shaky, right? So that's why purification practice using the 4 opponent powers is incredibly important. So that is how Atisha became accomplished in the first of the 3 higher trainings, the higher training of ethical discipline. Next, how did he become accomplished in the higher training of meditative stabilization? This has 2 points. First, he achieved the serviceability of the mind of calm abiding. So serviceability just means that that's we sometimes call pliability, right? He achieved suppleness, which is the recognition that you achieved actual calm abiding, that state of single-pointed concentration where your mind can focus on any object, whatever object you want for as long as you want without any interruption. And that's what's called the common meditative stabilization because it's common between Sutra and Tantra. Then he achieved the uncommon meditative stabilization, which is he had the extreme stability of the generation stage. And moreover, he had practiced the modes of conduct of yogic realization disciplines for 3 or 6 years. So this is the uncommon meditative stabilization is the first of the 2 tantric paths, the generation stage. And he achieved realization and calm abiding, he achieved meditative stabilization with regard to the first stage of tantra practice as well. And then, in addition to how did he become perfected in the qualities of wisdom, the higher training of wisdom, is again common and uncommon. Common being shared between Sutra and Tantra, uncommon being Tantra only. He attained the meditative stabilization of special insight, which is the union of calm abiding and special insight. And he had attained the special meditative stabilization of the completion stage. So special insight is the wisdom that conjoins and is built upon calm abiding. So we first develop calm abiding, which is single-pointed concentration. And then once we have single-pointed concentration, we focus it on an object and develop wisdom regarding that object. And that wisdom is a type of special insight, right? Lakton or Vipassana. So he achieved that in Sutra, and then he achieved the completion stage, which is the second stage of tantric practice. So that is how he perfected the qualities of all three higher trainings of ethical discipline and concentration and wisdom. So the next section is, having achieved all those, how did he work for the sake of the teachings of the Buddha? And what are his deeds? This is separated into two: his deeds in India and then his deeds in Tibet. So, at the Palace of the Great Enlightenment in Bodh Gaya, he defeated the proponents of base non-Buddhist doctrines by means of the Dharma 3 times, thus upholding the Buddha's teachings. So he engaged in debates with non-Buddhists near the Bodhi tree. We don't really know where, but in Bodh Gaya, where the Buddha achieved enlightenment, there were debates happening, and 3 times there were non-Buddhists who were challenging the Buddhist view, and he debated against them and defeated them in debate 3 times. In so doing, eliminating the taints of ignorance, misconception, and doubt, also with regard to the teachings of his own upper and lower systems, he spread the teachings so that he was regarded as a crown jewel beyond partiality by proponents of all factions. So, due to his great understanding of all the different philosophical systems that were taught by the Buddha, he was able to teach all of them equally, even if they weren't the philosophical school that he himself subscribed to. His expansive understanding was able to teach all of them, so he was celebrated as being impartial because he understood all of the teachings. In some way, we can compare that to His Holiness Dalai Lama now. So in Tibetan Buddhist practice, we have the 4 different lineages of Tibetan Buddhist practice, right? The Nyingmapa, the Kagyu, the Sakya, and the Gelug. And now they all share the same philosophical school. They all share the Prasangika view. But as you know, they have different lineages of practice, different types of meditation that they emphasize, different teachers, and so forth. So in the Nyingmapa, you hear lots of discussion about the great perfection. And in the Kagyu, there's lots of discussion about Mahamudra. And in the Sakya, there is the Lamdre, the path and results type of meditation practice, right? And they're all just different types of meditating on the nature of reality. But they are uncommon to the 4 different Tibetan lineages. And His Holiness Dalai Lama is a master. So that's not quite the same, but it's parallel. Atisha was a master and understood all of the different philosophical schools, and we see similar things in our own practice and our own teachers now. So we should try to make our understanding as expansive as possible. So those are his deeds in India. Now, what were his deeds in Tibet? First is cleaning up misconceptions about Dharma and restoring the tradition. So Lalampa, or Lalampa Yeshe-o, and his nephew sent the 2 great translators, Gyalten Seng and Ngatsot Sochim Gyawa, to India, one after the other. Due to their taking pains again and again to invite Atisha, he came to Upper Ngari during the reign of Janshupo, and he was requested to purify the Buddhist teachings. So the story of Atisha traveling to Tibet is, and see, this is given in more detail in the Lamrim Chemo. The Lama Yeshe-o was a king of an area called Guge, which is part of Tibet, and his nephew, Janshupo, he and his nephew tried to get Atisha to come, and Atisha kept refusing, right? Because they noticed that, the teachings first came, the Buddha, the Dharma first came to Tibet in the 8th century, right? With Shantarakshita being the abbot who brought the monastic teachings, and Guru Padmasambhava at the same time coming and bringing in tantric teachings in the 8th century. So now, by the end of the 9th century, they had observed that the teachings were a little bit there were misconceptions, that some people that practice tantra, they derided the people that practice sutra. People that practice sutra said bad things about the people that practice tantra, and in general, a lot of the teachings had declined. So they wanted Atisha, who was this jewel of the Vikramashila monastery, to come and restore the teachings in Tibet, but he kept declining, right? But finally, what happened was Lama Yeshe-o went on his own to try to follow these 2 translators that he had sent, and he was I knew you say arrested or kidnapped by the king. I guess they say the king of Nepal, though Nepal didn't really exist at the time. So it was another neighboring king, took him prisoner. And they said, if you want your freedom, you'll have to give us gold equal to your body weight. So they asked a ransom for the king. And so Janshupo traveled around to try to accumulate enough gold to ransom his uncle. And they say that he accumulated enough gold that was the same as Lalama Yeshe-o's weight, except for his head. So he didn't have quite enough. So he went to Lalama Yeshe-o and he said, I can't find enough gold, but I'm going to keep looking. Don't worry. And Lalama Yeshe-o said, it doesn't matter. It's okay for me to die in prison if you can use this gold to convince Atisha to come to Tibet and save the Dharma in Tibet. And so they had accumulated all this gold to use as ransom, and instead he took it to India, and he was able to finally convince Atisha to travel to Tibet. Atisha himself obviously finally consulted Tara, and Tara told him, "You have to go to Tibet," basically. And so that's how Atisha ended up coming to Tibet, due to the kindness of the Lama Yeshe-o and Janship-o, his nephew. So here it says that he came to purify the Buddhist teachings. Thereupon, he spread the teachings of composing the lamp for the path to enlightenment, a text bringing together all of the points of sutra and tantra and condensing them into the applicable stages, as well as other texts. Specifically, he spent 3 years in Ngari, which is a part of, I think, Ladakh right now, 9 years in Yetang, which is more, without teaching the fortunate all of the scriptures and instructions of sutra and tantra without exception. Thereby he restored the tradition of the teachings that had declined, he had made those that remained flourish, and he corrected those that had been soiled by all the errors of misconception, ensuring that the precious teachings were freed from all flaws. So he stayed in Tibet for 17 years. And here it's explaining the different places he went traveling. He knew when he went that he received the prophecy that said, if you do travel to Tibet, your lifespan will be shorter, but the benefit you'll have will be greater. And the amount of sentient beings that you will benefit will be even more excessive than if you stay in India. However, your lifespan will be shorter by a certain number of years. I don't remember how many years it is. And he chose to go because he realized that if I can benefit sentient beings, more sentient beings in that way, that's more important. And so he was in Tibet for 7. And the very first thing he did in Tibet was compose this text, The Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment. And it said that the abbot at Vikramasila insisted that Atisha could only go to Tibet for a short period of time and he'd have to return. Like he wanted Atisha to come back. But once Atisha composed Lamp for the Path to Enlightenment, which he composed in both Tibetan and Sanskrit simultaneously, he sent the Sanskrit version back to Vikramasila, and the abbot saw that and said, oh, okay, this is a good enough replacement because this text is the entire teachings of the Buddha, so therefore it's appropriate for him to stay and continue teaching. So next, what are the causes of a teacher's excellence in regard to composition? There are 3 causes of excellence in the composition of the text that was clarifying the sage or the Buddha's intentions. And so the text, the reason Atisha was able to compose an excellent text is because he was learned in the 5 areas of knowledge, because having received instructions on the application of the meaning that transmit the instructions of the perfectly complete Buddha in an unbroken line of exalted masters, and of him having received the permission to teach through the vision of a protector deity. If a text can be composed with any one of these causes of excellence, then it will turn out all the more excellent if they're all complete. And the great master Atisha possessed all 3. So in order to compose a text, you should have at least one of these 3 things. And he had all 3 of them, so the text that he composed was even more powerful. So the 5 areas of knowledge, right? These were mentioned a little bit before, but the 5 areas of knowledge, there are the 5 areas of outer knowledge and the 5 areas of inner knowledge. So the 5 areas of outer knowledge are shared with non-Buddhists, right? The Rigne Na, we call them. The 5 sciences, it's sometimes called. The first is linguistics. The second is medicine. The third is dialectics, right? So understanding how to set up a debate and how to set up the concept of debate as well as a teaching pedagogy. The fourth is arts and crafts, essentially, right? Crafts, we often translate it as, or handicrafts. And then the 5th is logic or valid cognition. So those are the 5 external sciences: linguistics, medicine, dialectics, crafts or handicrafts, and then valid cognition or logic. And those are shared. They're called the external sciences because they're shared by Buddhists and non-Buddhists. We have different definitions, right? Different opinions regarding them, but those 5 sciences were regarded as critical within ancient India that you become an expert in all 5 of those. And then the 5 inner sciences are we consider, so the inner science is the teachings of the Buddha, right? The teachings of the mind. That's why Buddhist Dharma is called the inner Dharma, because it's all describing the inner sciences or the inner types of knowledge. And if we were to divide them into 5, we say they are the Abhisamaya Alamkara, so the teachings on the perfection of wisdom. right? The how do you say that in English? I always forget. It's translated here earlier. Abhismaya the ornament for clear realization, are all the teachings on the perfection. And then the second one of the five inner sciences is the Madhyamaka Avatara, so engaging in the middle way, the teachings on wisdom, on emptiness. And then the Abhidharma Kosha, so the teachings on cosmology. And then the Pramana Vardika Karika, so the teachings on logic. And then the Vinaya Sutra, teachings on ethical discipline. So those are the five inner sciences that are uncommon to the inner the inner science of Buddhism. So teaching the perfections, teaching emptiness, teaching logic, teaching cosmology, and then teaching Vinaya. So you can see that those are the five main topics we also study here at the monastery as well, right? Our monastic studies parallel those five inner sciences. And he was an expert at all of those. I think I can finish this section today, and then we'll still have some time for questions before we are done for the day. So let's continue. The next point is how, due to a teacher possessing the three causes, his ability to ascertain the actual intentions of the victor or of the Buddha. This itself has 3 points. Oh, and I should say that he was given permission by Tara, where it says that third one, having received permission to teach through the vision of a protector deity, that was Tara. So Tara and Atisha have a very strong relationship. You know, there's a lot of wonderful stories of Atisha in association with Tara, with the Green Lady, he often calls her. So that's that. So then, how he was praised, he was cared for by protector deities. It says in the praise, again in the praise that was composed by Nakso Lotsoa, the translator, of the glorious Hivajra, of Samaya Vyuharaja, of heroic Lokeshvara, the noble Reverend Tara, and others. You had visions and permissions, and therefore dreaming and directly, you perpetually heard the teachings, holy teachings, both profound and vast. So Atisha is known to not have many different tantric meditation deities that he practiced. He kept it very small, right? And here it says that he had realizations of Hivajra. And if you remember that the very first person he studied tantra with, Rahula Gupta, was an expert at Hivajra, as well as Samaya Vyuha Raja, which is a Buddha, a Buddha that actually resembles Shakyamuni Buddha. And then Lokeshvara is the Buddha of compassion, Avalokiteshvara, and then Tara and others as well. Namely, Arapatsana is a wrathful emanation of wisdom, a wrathful emanation of Manjushri that he also is known to have practiced. There's a whole story of Atisha traveling to Sumatra, and there were these horrendous storms that were causing his ship to almost, flip over and to be drenched. And he manifested the body of Arapatsana, who came and rescued the ship as they were traveling to Sumatra. So it's saying that you've meditated on all of these deities and you've received their blessings. You've received initiation into the mandalas and realizations of them, and therefore they have assisted you in understanding all the teachings of the Buddha. Atisha held numerous lineages of masters, such as the two lineages of the common vehicle and of the Mahayana, with regard to which there are two, the Paramitayana and the secret Mantrayana. In regard to the Paramitayana, he held the two lineages of the view and conduct. As the latter has a lineage stemming from Maitreya as well as a lineage stemming from Manjughosha, he held three lineages. In the secret mantra, he received 5 types of transmission, as well as many other lineages, such as the lineage of tenets, the lineage of blessings, and a lineage of various instructions. The gurus from whom he heard instructions directly are mentioned in the praise. The gurus you always relied on were Shantipa, Serlingpa, Badabodri, Jnanashri, many with higher accomplishments. In particular, you held the profound and vast instructions that had been passed on from one to another all the way from Nagarjuna. It is well known that he had 12 gurus who had attained high accomplishments, in addition to many other gurus. So we often say that Atisha had 151 gurus, and he had perfect guru devotion to all 151 of them. He's one of the inspiring stories when we study guru devotion or how to properly rely on a teacher or on a spiritual friend. However, of all of his many teachers, 12 of them had achieved high levels of realization and accomplishments. Then the next step is the fact that a teacher was learned in the 5 areas of knowledge. That's the next subtitle. And Tsongkhapa just says, this has already been explained. For all these reasons, the master is able to skillfully ascertain the victor's intentions. So the reason he could understand the teachings of the Buddha on his own was because he had um, accomplished and realizations in the five outer sciences as well as the five inner sciences. And he studied with all of these great masters and had realizations, not just of the final view of the Buddha, but of all of the four lineages of philosophical understanding, as well as all of the different Mahayana and Theravada lineages, as well as Sutra and Tantra. So he studied every single thing in depth, and because of that, we can trust that what a teacher says, that this is what the Buddha meant, we can trust that to be true, right? And lastly, in this section, is a discussion of the special qualities of Atisha's disciples. And this is just listing some of his most popular and important disciples. So the master, Atisha, who was like this, had an incredible number of students in India, in Kashmir, in Haryana, Nepal, and Tibet. However, the main ones were the four great scholars in India who matched the master himself in their knowledge of Pitopa, Dharma Karmati, Madhyasimha, and Kshitigarbha. Some also add Mitra Guhya as the fifth. In Ngari, which is in Tibet, it was the great translators Rinchen Zampo and Nakso, as well as the ordained king, Janshupo, and in the province of Tsang, Gargewa, and Gokukpa, Latse, in Lodrak, Chakpatrichok, and Gewakyong, and in Kam, Nadropa Chempo, Gompowa, Shirabdorje, and Charatompa, and in central Tibet, the three, Ku, Nok, and Drom. So this is just listing many of his important disciples, and it says, among them, however, the great lineage holder who further spread the exalted activities of his guru was Dromtonpa Gyalten, who had been prophesied by Tara. This was a summary and description of the author's greatness. You should come to understand it more extensively by means of the great biographical texts. So that ends Tsongkhapa's that section. So just a note on Dromtonpa. Dromtonpa is considered an emanation of four-arm Chenrezig, the Buddha of compassion, and he was prophesied. So there are sutras that were spoken by the Buddha that prophesy Dromtonpa and his coming. And we see Dromtonpa as the precursor to the lineage of Dalai Lamas to some extent, right? He is an emanation of the Buddha of compassion. And he was destined to study with the Vikramashila monk who came from Bengal and to be his heart disciple. So many of the teachings we have came from Atisha through Dromtonpa. So he gets referenced quite often. And I think that's where we'll end it for today. We've covered these first few sections. And I'll admit, these first sections are not the most interesting sections in this text, right? We're not getting into the heart of the text. But if we're going to study a complete text, we have to understand every piece of it, right? And like I said in the beginning, if we want to embody the three qualities of a vessel that isn't broken, we want to avoid that, then we have to have this open mind and realize that this part of the text, this opening section, is here for a reason, right? It's not just delayed enjoyment to get to the good stuff. There's a reason that these texts come with this preamble, that we're explaining all of the good qualities of Atisha, and all of the way that he achieved those good qualities. And so I'll admit, myself personally, when I first started studying the Dharma and I read the Lamrim Chenmo and any of these texts from Tibetan masters, and they start with this whole section that is like, I want the good stuff. I want to jump over this stuff. Like that was my impulse as well. I appreciate that impulse. And that's a good impulse, right? We want to practice, but we need to take a step back and say, if this wasn't important, Tsongkhapa wouldn't have written it, right? Tsongkhapa wouldn't include something that didn't matter. So the fact that Tsongkhapa included all this makes us realize that there is utility to us studying this. And if you've studied the Lamrim Chenmo, the great treatise, you know that this is already a lot shorter than that same section in the Lamrim Chenmo, right? So he is paring it down to what is most important. So especially when you look at the PDF and you look at the outlines, then those show why this is important. It's about developing conviction in the teachings. And developing conviction in the teachings means we have to develop conviction in the author of those teachings. And if we don't have that conviction, then it's going to be very hard for us to take these teachings and make them part of our heart practice, because we'll accept them as intellectual understanding, but we won't have any sort of emotional relationship to them, right? So all of these steps may seem like preliminary, but they're important. They are the foundation upon which we develop wisdom and we develop practice. So I appreciate that it's not the most exciting part of the text. However, it is really important, and I'm really glad that all of you have been on this journey and started this text with me. And I look forward to continuing in many, many weeks to come. But I will say for now, we have some time. So are there any questions about the Lamrim, the middle length Lamrim in general, or about what we've talked about today, and about Atisha, and about Atisha bringing these to Tibet, or any of the things that have come up, we have some time for questions, if there are any.
Venerable.
Yes.
So just a thought came across because we are also doing Sundays. We've been doing it for a few months, Shantideva's Bodhicharya Avtara, which also covers the 6 parameters. So I
Yes.
was just thinking, is there a perspective difference because it talks about so it just came up that is Atisha's interpretation of the 6 parameters or the explanations on wisdom,
Mm-hmm.
meditative concentration,
Yeah.
ethics. Ours
Well, so
is
Atisha's
yeah,
text is much more expansive, right? So Shantideva's text, exploring the Paramitas, is only covering what we consider the great scope. So all of the meditation practices and realizations that precede it in the small scope and the medium scope aren't contained in Shantideva's text. Sometimes they're alluded to, right? But they're not contained in it. So as you know, we'll start with, after we get over the preamble, there's the importance of relying on a guru, and then there's meditating on perfect human rebirth and death and impermanence, and then understanding suffering of the lower realms, understanding karma, understanding suffering of the higher realms, the 12 links of dependent origination, and so forth. All of these steps, right, that sequentially go. And then they end, those are the small and medium scopes. And then the great scope is where we start studying the paramitas, the 6 paramitas. So Shantideva's text isn't a complete view of practice. It's an incomplete in that regard. And also, um, Shantideva's text is, especially the teaching on emptiness, which is the 9th chapter, is profound and important, really, really hard to understand. And so in general, we say that Tsongkhapa's text is much clearer to understand than Shantideva's text. And in fact, the only way we can understand Shantideva's text is through commentators such as Tsongkhapa and other Indian and Tibetan commentators, because his text is so deep and thick, and it's in verse. So texts in verse already are harder to understand because you get rid of the grammar that doesn't fit your meter, like this. So in that regard, it's teaching the same thing, but this text hypothetically is easier to understand, at least for wisdom. As we've been studying on Sundays, a lot of Shantideva's text is quite easy to understand and practice. The wisdom section, the last chapter, is quite difficult. But so that's the big difference. Shantideva's text isn't focused on the entire practice going from samsara to Buddhahood. It's only focusing on a bodhisattva's practice. And this is focusing on how we get to bodhisattva's practice as well as bodhisattva's practice.
thank you.
It's a good question, though. Okay, if there are no other questions, and I can understand that because everything we studied today hopefully is pretty straightforward, then why don't we take a moment to recognize that our practice today has generated some merit for all of us. And in order to try to make our activities pure in the 3 ways, so pure in the beginning, or virtuous rather, in the beginning, in the middle, and the end. In the beginning, we develop a strong motivation that we want is the Mahayana motivation to benefit others. In the middle, we dedicate ourselves to actual study and practice. And in the end, we dedicate any merit we've accumulated to other sentient beings. So we recognize that our practice has accumulated some good karma, and we wish that that good karma would ripen on others, that others would experience the fruitioning results of that good karma, that other sentient beings might be relieved of their suffering, that they might achieve realizations, that they might meet perfect Mahayana virtuous friends, and quickly become Buddhas themselves. And to that end, we dedicate all this merit that we ourselves might become Buddhas as quickly as possible, so that we might lead all sentient beings out of samsara and out of suffering. And with that in mind, we'll offer these quick dedication prayers. This first one we'll offer once in Tibetan and then once in English, and then the other few verses we will offer in English. So again, I encourage you to recite these along with me. Chanchu sem chorim poche ma ke panam ke gyuchi ke wanyam pa me pa yang gone gonde pelwa shok. May the supreme jewel of bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow. May that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good, all-powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso. Please remain until samsara ends. Savior of the snowland teachings and transmigratory beings, who makes extremely clear the path that is the unification of emptiness and compassion, the lotus holder, Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. May the glorious Guru's lives be long and stable. May all beings equal in the extent of space have happiness. May I and others without exception accumulate merit and purify negativities, and may we be blessed to quickly attain Buddhahood. And I think we'll end it there for today. Thank you so much. I appreciate all of you. I'm very glad to begin studying this text with you. And I do encourage you to read, as I mentioned, that next week you come prepared if you do have any doubts about what we covered. And I'd say look over the next 10 pages or so, probably. You know, that's a good guess, 10 to 15 pages a week. That's a good starting place to guess. So at least try to read those and see if you have any doubts that come up so we can study this together when we get together next week as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Venerable. Thank you so much.
Can I just ask a question before everyone leaves? And then Alice, can you end it after my question? This is regarding the group, since we're all studying, and I can see that today we had about 22 people. That's leaving Venerable 22 students who want to study this. Do you all see value in us creating a small group? So if there are questions and discussions that we could do it within, maybe on WhatsApp, if you want to only, we can create a subgroup and we can keep it going, since so many of you have shown interest. You can write to me and say whatever, whether you like it, the idea or not, and we can go by majority. Okay. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dipti. Let us end the session with offering 3 prostrations to the 3 jewels of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, which also are the Guru. It's an auspicious ending.
It's stand in prostrations, please. Stand in prostrations.
And as a reminder on the following program, so tomorrow morning we have the next session on the Bodhisattvas, the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life online. And next week, both sessions, also the Saturday second session in this course and the Sunday, again, the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life are also taking place online. Thank you all for joining us. Is there anything else we should still mention or cover? No? Okay, I think this is maybe all. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Venerable. Thank you, everyone.